The Nicolas Sarkozy case in France just concluded with a guilty verdict, 5 years for his role in a corruption scheme spanning France, America, and Africa. In this video, I'm going to explain how Sarkozy's sentence is just a small part of one of the clearest and most blatant examples of modern neocolonialism in Africa. And sadly, the shocking and deadly effects are still being felt today. If you don't know me, my name is TJ, I'm Nigerian and British mixed, and on this channel, we talk about African geopolitics. So a Paris court has just sentenced former French President Nicolas Sarkozy to 5 years in prison after finding him guilty of criminal conspiracy over alleged illegal financing of his 2007 presidential campaign with funds from the government of then Libyan leader Muammar Gaddafi. The court ruled that Sarkozy will be incarcerated despite his intention to appeal, making him the first former president of modern France sentenced to actual time behind bars. But here's the timeline that reveals the shocking truth. Sarkozy was accused of making a deal with Gaddafi in 2005 when he was interior minister to obtain campaign financing, all in exchange for supporting the then isolated Libyan government on the international stage. The prosecutors were able to prove that Sarkozy had knowingly benefited from what they described as a corruption pact with Gaddafi's government. The declassified emails also revealed that Gaddafi had been hoarding 143 tons of gold and a similar amount in silver. This gold was intended to establish a pan-African currency based on the Libyan golden dinar, designed to provide Francophone Africa with an alternative to the CFA franc. After taking Gaddafi's money and winning the 2007 election, Sarkozy invited the Libyan leader for a lengthy state visit to Paris, setting up his Bedouin tent in gardens near the Elysee Palace. Sarkozy was the first Western leader to welcome Gaddafi on a full state visit since a freeze in relations that dates back to the 1980s. Then came the double cross that should make every African leader think carefully. In 2011, Sarkozy put France at the forefront of a NATO-led strike against Gaddafi's troops that helped rebel fighters topple his regime. NATO launched a war in Libya expressly aimed at toppling the government of the long-time leader Gaddafi. The US and its allies, including the UK, sent hundreds of cruise missiles, destroying the government's ability to resist rebel forces. The evidence shows that this was not about humanitarianism. It was about preventing African monetary independence. According to the declassified emails, French intelligence officers discovered Gaddafi's pan-African currency plan shortly after the rebellion began. And this was one of the factors that influenced President Sarkozy's decision to coordinate with the US and commit France to the attack on Libya. Gaddafi's preferred plan was to develop the Libyan dinar into a gold currency as primary means for payment for oil. It would have been a great challenge to the dollar and maybe even created huge economic issues for the United States. This is exactly the neocolonial pattern that every African must recognize. France has spent decades maintaining control over 14 African countries through the CFA franc system, forcing them to deposit 50% of their foreign reserves in the French treasury. Gaddafi wanted to introduce the gold dinar to back African currencies, thus freeing them from their dollar standard. Gaddafi also longed to protect Africa's natural resources from what he referred to as Western looters. The propaganda about Gaddafi being a terrible dictator who needed to be removed becomes laughable when you examine what Libya actually achieved under his leadership. Public education in the country became free and primary education compulsory, and that's for both sexes. Medical care became available to the public at no cost. Under Gaddafi, per capita income in the country rose dramatically. By 2011, Libya led all of Africa in Human Development Index values. Education from kindergarten to college level was free in Libya. The Libyan government paid for citizens to travel abroad, including many to the United States for their college education. Citizens received free electricity. Banks provided interest-free loans. Newlyweds in Libya received $50,000. Free housing and free apartments were provided to many citizens. 40 loaves of bread at one point cost only 20 cents. Petrol was also extraordinarily cheap, around 14 cents per litre. Mothers received $5,000 upon giving birth. Unemployed Libyans received unemployment benefits. Does that sound like a backwards African country to you? The country's literacy rate rose to 90%, and a welfare system was introduced that allowed access to free education and healthcare. Libya also built the Great Man-Made River Project, pumping water from major aquifers to urban populations and new irrigation projects. Compare this to what NATO and the United States accomplished after their humanitarian intervention. Since Gaddafi's death in 2011, the country has descended into civil war. A transitional government failed to implement rule of law in the country, which has now splintered into several factions of militants, tribes, and gangs. The results are horrifying. The 2011 NATO-led overthrow of Gaddafi dismantled Libya's welfare state completely, enabling militants to privatize oil wealth, 85% revenues, and exploit migration routes. In cities like Sabah, there are documented cases of people being sold into slavery for as little as $200 to $500. In 2017, the shocking revelation of a slave market operating in Libya, where individuals were auctioned, drew widespread condemnation. The International Organization for Migration reveals that 73% of migrants in Libya endure forced labor, toiling on construction sites, farms, or within detention centers, where their subjugation generates profits for armed groups. The UN Support Missions to Libya estimates that armed groups earn $1 billion annually from trafficking and EU-funded detention contracts. This is what it looks like when Western powers destroy functional African governments. NATO supported an array of rebel groups fighting on the ground in Libya, many of which were dominated by Islamist extremists and harbored violently racist views. But here's the overlooked consequence that affects all of Africa. Many of these Western-funded rebel groups didn't disappear. After Gaddafi's death, they evolved into the hyper-Islamic terrorist organizations now wreaking havoc across the Sahel region. The weapons training and the networks established during NATO's intervention has spread throughout Africa, fueling groups like Boko Haram, Jnim, and Islamic State affiliates. These groups are destabilizing Mali, Burkina Faso, Niger, and even northern Nigeria. The West armed and funded these extremists to remove Gaddafi, then act surprised when the same groups turn the entire Sahel into a terrorist epicenter. The hypocrisy is staggering. They claimed Gaddafi was a threat to human rights, then actually delivered Libya to slave traders and militants. Post-regime change, the International Monetary Fund austerity measures gutted public services, plundering 60% of Libyans into poverty. In each of the last 3 years before 2027, 150,000 people made the dangerous crossing across the Mediterranean Sea from Libya into Europe. For 4 years in a row, over 3,000 refugees died while attempting that journey. But the cause of this desperate migration, which Europeans everywhere seem to be protesting all the time about, is never discussed in the mainstream. Sarkozy's conviction simply exposes the corrupt heart of neocolonialism. This is a man who took 50 million euros from an African leader, promised diplomatic support, then orchestrated his brutal assassination the moment Gaddafi threatened French monetary control over Africa. "We came, we saw, he died." The famous Hillary Clinton quote as she spoke about the situation on a CBS video interview on hearing of the capture and brutal murder of Gaddafi. The lessons for African leaders are crystal clear. African leaders who challenge Western monetary control will be targeted for regime change, and the humanitarian intervention narrative is the propaganda designed to justify theft of monetary control. Now, I know Gaddafi wasn't perfect, but everyone watching this video should ask themselves this question. If Gaddafi was such a terrible dictator, why is Libya now a failed state open to slave markets? Why are Libyans worse off in every measurable way? The answer reveals the true nature of the Western interventions. They're designed to maintain economic control, not deliver any kind of freedom. Sarkozy's 5-year sentence is a little bit of justice, but it's also a warning. The same corrupt system that enabled him to take bribes and orchestrate assassinations is still operating across Africa to this day. Until Africans control their own currencies, resources, and defense systems, they remain vulnerable to the next Sarkozy, the next humanitarian intervention, and the next betrayal by those who smile while planning Africa's destruction. I would love to know what you guys think about this. I know the story is a bit heavy, but I think it's an important one. please put your comments down below. But if you have nothing to say, would it be too much for me to ask you to write the words "End Neocolonialism now"? It just lets me know that you watched the video to the end, you support the channel, you like what I'm doing, and you want me to continue. Thank you so much for watching today, and I'll catch you in the next one. Peace.